The Psychology of Criminal Conduct, 7th edition, Chapter 14. Criminal subtypes, intimate partner violence, the mentally disordered, and sexual offenders. In this chapter, we look at different types of offenders. The word type is used with some hesitation because the word conveys the idea of a clearly defined category with little or no overlap. However, many justice-involved persons do not neatly fit into any one category. In fact, very few specialize in only one type of crime. Sexual offenders commit non-sexual crimes, and non-batterers assaults others who are unrelated to them. The versatility of criminal offenders is illustrated in a survey of more than 2,000 male inmates from Australian prisons. Mackay and Payne, 2005, found only 26% of the prisoners reporting having committed just one offense type. The weight of the evidence does not appear to support versatility. However, or rather than offense specialization. However, many do show a preference for certain antisocial acts that allow us to make rough categorizations, although versatility within these categories is still evident. For example, in a review of 25 studies of untreated fire setters, there were 5 times more likely to set another fire during follow-up than non-fire setters. Moreover, approximately 60% of the fire setters committed other crimes. Sometimes scholars begin with dissecting the criterion behavior or the criminal act, and then develop theories to explain the offense. Thus, there are theories of white-collar crime, vandalism, and violence. Instead of emphasizing these many theories, the position is taken that much can be learned from a comprehensive theoretical base, and that the correlates of general criminal behavior show remarkable similarities for specific forms of deviance. 3 major subtypes of justice-involved persons are presented in this chapter: those who commit intimate partner violence, the mentally disordered, and persons committing sexual crimes. Other subtypes could have been selected, but the 3 to be described have a literature that has been linked to the R&R model. There is an exploding interest in research with people who have committed acts of terrorism, but there is only one study applying the R&R model. On the face of it, the 3 subtypes may appear to represent extreme groups with little in common. However, sometimes there are more similarities than there are differences. Intimate partner violence. The most recent prevalence estimates of intimate partner violence, IPV, are provided by Sardinia and her colleagues, using the data from the World Health Organization 2018 survey. A literature review of 366 studies along with the country consolations found 27% of women from 161 countries to have suffered IPV. In addition, 13% experienced IPV within the past year. Lifetime prevalence of physical violence was 21%, and for sexual violence, it was 2%. In addition, it was estimated that with the COVID-19 lockdowns, IPV violence increased approximately 8 percentage points, with the largest spikes appearing within the first week of closures. Certain segments are particularly affected by IPV among visible minorities. For example, 53.6% of 2,000 Latino women who were surveyed in 2008 reported being a victim of interpersonal violence over their lifetime. And 4 out of 10 Black women in America will have suffered IPV. Other groups disproportionately represented are indigenous populations and members of the LGBTQ community. In a review of 750 articles published between 2000 and 2010, Sarah Desmarais and her colleagues found for women a rate of violent victimization of 23.1% in the past year. However, men were also victims of intimate partner violence. In criminal justice samples, the prevalence rates were much higher, 31.1% for women. Only one study in the review included male offenders, but it was estimated based on other sources that the rate for men would be between 44 and 49%. For women, IPV is also the leading cause of homicidal death in the world. IPV is also evident among same-sex couples. But because the majority of victims are women, our discussion will focus on male batterers. Studying violence within intimate relationships is important for a number of reasons. First, it helps to uncover ways of decreasing victimization. The woman who is abused by her partner is not only at risk for her own personal safety, but also for the safety of her children. Second, both the women and the children who witness the violence are more likely to experience emotional, psychological, and behavioral problems. A meta-analysis of 207 studies by Spencer and her colleagues found women to be at an increased risk for depression, R equals 0.28, K equals 85, and post-traumatic stress disorder, R equals 0.35, K equals 53. Third, we need to know who are the high-risk abusers. Their accurate identification is needed to inform police and other social agents who are empowered to remove aggressors for the protection of other family members. Because the majority of women, for various reasons, find it difficult to leave abusive relationships, they are at risk for re-victimization. Social services providers also require knowledge of effective interventions for male batterers. Even when a woman leaves an abusive partner, the violence may continue with another woman as the victim. A recent meta-analysis by Cordier, Chung, Wilkes, Gillian, and Sprayer, 2021, is quite informative. The researchers reviewed 25 studies on the effectiveness of protection orders, i.e. court-imposed prohibition for the abuser to avoid contact with the victim. Even with such restrictions, IPV recidivism rates ranged from 28.2% for police reports of violence to 34.3% for the victim-reported abuse. Finally, understanding IPV is important for the primary prevention of future violence. There are now a number of reviews of the literature agreeing that children who experienced and witnessed family violence have an increased risk of growing up to be violent in both intimate and general interpersonal relationships. Among justice-involved samples, the prevalence of witnessing family violence is very high. A review of 62 studies found rates of 41% for boys and men and 48% for girls and women. Furthermore, childhood aggression may also be predictive of spousal violence. A persuasive study in this regard comes from the Concordia Longitudinal Risk Project. More than 1,700 inner-city children from Montreal, Canada, were followed over a 30-year span. The investigators found that aggressive behavior in childhood predicted self-reported partner violence in adulthood, R equals 0.14. In this section, and similarly and in the subsequent sections, the following questions derived from a PCC are asked. 1. Do men who commit violence against their partners have risk factors similar to general justice-involved persons? 2. What are the effective interventions for those who assault their partners? Risk factors in IPV. How different are men who batter from regular criminals? How similar and how different IPV perpetrators are from general justice-involved persons can be approached in 3 ways. First, we can examine the criminal histories and criminal futures of men who abuse their partners. If the man convicted of assault has an extensive history of IPV and a reoffending pattern of IPV that excludes other violent acts, then we may include specialization. However, if history and future consists of a variety of non-IPV crimes, then we may include that the person is a generalist and not much different from non-IPV offenders. The evidence suggests that latter, and it has been apparent since at least 2006. 1. Similarities in the criminal past and futures for male batterers and general offenders. In a large study, 4,261 medium to high-risk IPV inmates were compared to 4,261 non-IPV inmates. The IPV sample committed a variety of offenses not limited to IPV. For example, 48.3% had a history of property offenses and 27.4% had prior drug offenses. The corresponding rate for the non-IPV group were 44.1% and 41.6%. What stood out was that the IPV inmates compared to the non-IPV were higher risk and had more criminogenic and non-criminogenic needs. 2. The central 8 and intimate partner abuse. Second, we can look at how well the central 8 risk need factors, Chapter 3, line up with the risk need factors for men who abuse their partners. Recall that the central 8 is derived from a general personality and cognitive social learning perspective of criminal behavior, and note that the italics are purposely added. The hypothesis forwarded here is that the central 8 would be just as relevant to IPV as it is with general justice involved persons. Some minor adjustments may be required. Example, it is okay to steal becomes it is okay to hurt my partner. But the general constructs apply. We begin with criminal history. A. Criminal history. The average effect size from the two meta-analysis range from R equals 0.08 up to 0.49, depending on how prior history was measured. The smaller effect size reported by Spencer and Stith 2020 may be an outlier, as it dealt solely with intimate partner homicide and was correlation, as was Spencer ETL 2022. A history of sexual violence, stalking, and controlling behavior is common finding, and they equally two blacks and whites, R equals 0.38 and R equals 0.23, Kelly Spencer, Collitz, McAllister, and Stith, 2022. B. Pro-criminal attitudes. Pro-criminal attitudes and studies of IPV focus on attitudes specific to supporting partner violence. The distorted thinking about IPV, such as it is her fault or the alcohol made me lose control, is at the core of IPV. Many different ways of assessing attitudes have been conducted. For example, in Spencer and this review, it was jealousy. Example, my partner must give me all the attention and no one else. R equals 0.25. Jealousy and fear of infidelity is often viewed as a main driver in IPV. In a systematic review of 51 papers from 28 countries, the authors concluded, we found that real or suspected infidelity and RJ, romantic jealousy, were strongly related to IPV. Attitudes are developed early, beginning with the exposure to family violence as a child. Pamela Pickleton and her colleagues provide an informative meta-analysis. Their review was a maladaptive schemas. Schemas are mental representations of the self, one's relationship to others, and in the world in general. A schema domain will include a number of specific attitudes. For example, the schema mistrust abuse can include the attitude that my partner cannot be trusted or that I am the boss and should be obeyed. In Pickleton, I cannot say his name, ETL's meta-analysis effect sizes found among 5 studies that measured the mistrust abuse schema range from R equals 0.22 to 0.41. Attitudes supportive of IPV have a clear link to the behavior. C. Pro-criminal associates. Friends that support one's behavior are a powerful risk-need factor in GPCSL. Associates can provide the reward cost contingencies that influence behavior for good or bad. Surprisingly, there has been little research on whether a male batterer associates with other male batterers. Perhaps men try to hide and keep the violence at home. However, we do know that deviant peer influence is an important factor in dating violence. 3 meta-analytic reviews have reported effect sizes in the range of R equals 0.20 to 0.25. We have little reason not to believe that associates supportive to aggressive and violent behavior would not also apply to IPV. D. Antisocial pattern, APP. APP is a broad category and described in Table 3.1 as being impulsive, adventurous, pleasure-seeking, generalized trouble, multiple victims, multiple settings, restlessly aggressive, callous disregard for others. Trying to assess the results from the research has some challenges because of the different descriptions of personality that are used and measured. A meta-analysis by Spencer and her colleagues reviewed 209 studies that assessed the relationship between mental health factors and IPV, both perpetration and victimization. The effect size was R equals to 0.29 for perpetrators of abuse who had a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. In Spencer's ETL's 2022 meta-analysis of cross-sectional and correlation studies, the effect sizes were R equals 0.27 for antisocial personality disorder, R equals 0.23 for impulsivity, and R equals 0.32 for anger. Berkeley and Urquhart, 2015, further analyzed some of the key constructs in APP. The average effect size was R equals 0.28 for hostility, R equals 2.4 for anger, and R equals 0.32 for studies that combined hostility with anger. Finally, Collision and Lineman, 2021, examined the relationship of 10 personality disorders to IPV. Antisocial personality disorders displayed the highest effect size, R equals 0.35. E. Family marital. Poor partner relationships represent an obvious criminogenic need. An early meta-analysis found a mean effect size, or a mean effect of 0.27 between dissatisfaction with the relationship and IPV. Stithgreen, Smith, and Ward, 2008. The research on this topic has also studied the specific behaviors within the partner relationship. For example, large effect sizes have been reported by Spencer and Stith, 2020, for controlling behaviors, R equals 0.43, and threatened victim with a weapon, R equals 0.48. Schoolwork, Spencer ETL, 2022, found a small but significant mean, R equals 0.08 for unemployment, and R equals 0.15 for lower education. In Spencer and Stith's 2020 meta-analysis, and remember that the outcome was femicide, the results for education and employment were R equals 0.14 and R equals 0.19 respectively. Substance misuse in a comprehensive meta-analysis, Kifarki, Mendez, Anderson, and Stith, 2018, reviewed 285 studies specifically on substance misuse and IPV. The mean effect size for any substance use was R equals 0.23. When the data examined to see if alcohol use was more important than drug use, there was no difference. H. Leisure recreation. There have been no studies reporting on the criminogenic need. The summary of the Central 8 provides evidence that what is important with general criminal behavior is important with IPV. The one caution in interpreting the results is that all the meta-analysis are based in correlational studies. Longitudinal studies are notably absent. This leads us to a third way of answering the question of whether male batterers have some fundamental differences from the general offending population. We can look to see if risk needs assessments do any better in predicting outcomes than general risk needs instruments. One feature of these assessment instruments is that they are based on a longitudinal research designs. Actuarial risk scales for intimate partner abuse. Murray Strauss, 1996, was perhaps the first to present an objective checklist for identifying high-risk male batterers. The checklist included items that we know are reliable predictors of criminal behavior. Example, drug misuse, history of violence, rationalizations for abuse. However, the checklist was silent on social supports for the behavior and only indirectly tapped personality factors, extreme dominance, extreme jealousy. Other experts in the area have presented similar lists based upon their reviews of the literature. Today, such lists have been formalized into more structured and objective assessment instruments. Here's the table 14.1. Let's see if I can get as close as I can. Hopefully you can read that. Should you need to pause. Two of the more widely used assessment instruments are the Spousal Assault Risk Assessment, SARA, Kropp, Hart, Webster, and Eves, 1995, and the Ontario Domestic Assault Risk Assessment, ODARA, Hilton, Harris, ETL, 2004. The SARA is a structured clinical judgment instrument consisting of 20 items covering 5 areas: criminal history, psychosocial adjustment, spousal assault history, current offense, and other considerations. The ODARA is a 13-item scale sampling historical and dynamic items. See Table 14.1 for a few illustrative items from the two scales. As with SARA, there are a number of items of general criminal behavior. Example, has a prior non-domestic assault and offender is violent outside of the home. Although many of the items overlap conceptually, there are some important differences. Example, the SARA has items pertaining to a clinical diagnosis. One reason for the differences is the ODARA is originally designed to be administered by police officers, while the SARA is usually administered by trained clinical professionals. In an early study of 2 samples of men, total of 589, with a follow-up of more than 400 years, scores on the ODARA predicted new assaults and the severity of new assaults. The AUC for the developmental sample was 0.77, and it was 0.72 for the cross-validation sample. However, a follow-up study of the ODARA found that the predictive validity estimates had significantly decreased AUCs of 0.65 to 0.67 in 2 samples. This led the researchers to add the PCLR to the ODARA, producing the Domestic Violence Risk Appraisal Guide. But this only led to a small increase in AUC from 0.70 to 0.71. However, the addition of the PCLR, it is viewed as providing more nuanced information for high-risk cases. Research on both instruments has been extensive to generally supportive of their use. In a review of the AUC values for 5 IPV risk instruments, Jill Messing and Jonelle Thaler, 2013, found that the SARA and the ODARA had the highest AUCs among the 5 risk scales selected. The ODARA predicted partner assault slightly better, AUC equals 0.67, 95% CI equals 0.665 to 0.668. Then the SARA, AUC equals 0.63, 95% CI equals 0.627 to 0.629. A more recent review also reported AUCs in the range of 0.64 to 0.77 for the ODARA and 0.52 to 0.72 for the SARA. One advantage of the ODARA over the SARA is, as already noted, is that its administration does not typically require professional clinicians. With introductory training, frontline workers such as nurses and police officers can administer the ODARA in a reliable manner. In the literature review by Nichols and her colleagues, it was noted that relatively little research has been conducted comparing IPV-specific risk instruments to other risk instruments that have been shown to predict generally violent recidivism. For example, would the SARA or ODARA predict partner violence better than the VRAG or an LS instrument? GPCSL theory would suggest that there would be little difference in the predictive validities between IPV-specific instruments and the more general assessment tools. Nichols and her colleagues examined the few studies that compared IPV-specific instruments with more general risk instruments. Unfortunately, given that there were few such comparisons, the reviewers were unable to reach a conclusion for superiority of IPV-specific instruments over the more general assessment tools. Zoe Hilton and Liam Enos, 2020, along with Louise Dixon and Nicola Graham-Caven, 2020, have also made strong cases for better integrating R&R into IPV assessment and the risk management of male batterers. They acknowledge that the IPV risk instruments do a satisfactory job in following the risk principle, i.e. differentiating lower risk from higher risk cases. However, the risk measures pay insufficient attention to criminogenic needs, even though the central 8 are relevant. Recall our earlier discussion. In addition, responsivity factors need to be considered. For example, in one review, this effect size between depression and IPV was R equals 0.15. As shown in chapters 11 and 12, criminogenic need and responsivity factors are crucial to effect intervention. Therefore, we now turn to treatment. Treatment to male batterers. In 1984, Lawrence Sherman and Richard Burke conducted a study in which Minneapolis police officers who responded to calls of domestic disputes were randomly assigned to one of the three conditions. 1, arrest the suspect. 2, remove the suspect from the home for 8 hours. 3, advise the suspect and victim to seek help. A 6-month follow-up found a lower reabuse rate for the arrest condition, 13%. According to police data, the rate was 26% for the removal from the home condition and 18% for providing advice. Within a few years, states began passing mandatory arrest legislations in IPV incidents. Soon 29 states had mandatory arrest laws, and similar laws have been implemented in other countries. Sherman and Burke's 1984 findings run counter to the rehabilitation literature, in which sanctions do not decrease recidivism but rather show small increases in recidivism. Could it be that getting tough for male batterers is the exceptions to the rule? The beauty of meta-analysis is that it reminds us that no one study can define or explain a phenomena. In recent meta-analysis of mandatory arrest police policies, no deterrent effect was found, R equals 0.01. To make matters worse, Sherman and Harris, 2015, followed up the 1,125 victims from one of the early replications of the Minnesota experiment.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and found approximately 25 years later that for those whose partners were arrested rather than warned, the women were more likely to die prematurely, perhaps the result of living in a stressful relationship. Premature death was mostly due to cancer and heart disease. Homicide was rare, 2 of the arrested group and 1 for warned group. The results were particularly salient for African Americans, R equals 0.40. As noted in Chapter 13, giving up on punishment does not come easily. Researchers searched for something in the mandatory arrest experiments to show that getting tough worked. For example, arrests worked for employed male batterers, apparently because employed assaulters have a stake in conformity and therefore have much to lose being arrested. Sherman, 2018. That is, mandatory arrests work for low-risk batterers, but it is the high-risk who cause the most harm that really need to detest. Male batterers may be arrested but not necessarily prosecuted. There are many reasons for this. For example, the victim may refuse to press charges. Belknap and Grant, 2018. Consequently, a number of jurisdictions introduced no-drop prosecution policies. This has been problematic because it takes control away from the victim and risks re-traumatization when testifying in court. Evaluations of mandatory arrest and prosecution policies have reported a range of outcomes from slight to no decrease in recidivism, court backlogs, and victim dissatisfaction with the process. There has also been interest in the severity of a sanction and its impact on IPV recidivism. A recent meta-analysis of 33 studies by Garner, Maxwell, and Lee, 2021, evaluated the impact of 3 different types of sanctions on IPV. The 3 sanctions were prosecution as opposed to a warning. Conviction and incarceration. Prosecution showed small deterrent effect, R equals negative 0.05, K equals 10. Receiving a conviction showed no effect, R equals 0.006. K equals 26. Receiving a custodial sentence actually increased future IPV, R equals plus 0.10. K equals 21. At best, getting tough with male batterers may bring temporary relief and safety for the women, but it does not lead to long-term change in the perpetrator. Huck ETL, 2020. Neither specialized probation supervision, Klein and Crow, 2008, nor specialized courts that deal with IPV cases have demonstrated increased victim safety. Sisner, Labrolio, and Rempel, 2015. This should not be surprising given that criminal justice sanctions do not address the criminogenic needs of male batterers. Although mandatory arrests and similar policies remain widely used, many are recognizing that treatment must be part of the solution. The earliest well-designed evaluation of a treatment intervention was by Donald Dutton, 1986. 50 men attending a 4-month cognitive behavioral program were compared to a matched group of 50 men who were not treated because their probation terminated before space was available in the program. Dutton found a reabuse rate of 4% for the treated men and 16% for the untreated group at a 6-month follow-up. At 2.5 years, the treated group maintained the benefits of the treatment, while the recidivism rate for the untreated group increased to 40%. Since the early Dutton study, few subsequent evaluations of treatment programs have found such clear results. Part of the problem has been that many evaluations have been hampered by weak methodologies. For example, Thomas Akonsi and his colleagues complained that their review of European batterer programs were so plagued by design issues that they could reach no conclusion on the effectiveness of these programs. However, even randomized controlled trials have shown little effect. A number of reviews and meta-analysis of IPV treatments programs have reached differing conclusions. In an early meta-analysis, Julia Babcock, Charles Green, and Chet Roby, 2004, reviewed 22 studies of treatment interventions. The overall result was that treatment was associated with a small reduction in reabuse, R equals 0.09. However, a meta-analysis of 19 articles reported no overall effect of treatment. One review of 9 couples therapy interventions published between 2019 and 2021 found mixed results, with one study reporting increased IPV for high-risk couples. Reviews of the IPV treatment literature are not as informative as the reviews of the general rehabilitation literature. Often there is a lack of information as to what actually goes on in treatment. A treatment may be described as cognitive behavioral, but that only tells us how the treatment was delivered and not what was being treated. Substance misuse is often seen by clinicians as a major factor in IPV, as it diminishes personal control. Thus, it has often targeted in treatment programs. Unfortunately, one meta-analysis of men who misuse alcohol or drugs found no differences between treated and untreated men or on either substance use or IPV. The general rehabilitation literature with justice-involved persons is detailed enough to teach us the importance of focusing on criminogenic needs and adhering to the risk principle. The outlook for the future, however, is promising. As described earlier, there has been considerable progress in applying actuarial-based risk needs assessment on a wide scale and introducing R&R principles. Hilton Radat's 2001 regarding treatment adopting R&R principles has been slow, with perhaps the first evaluation reported in 2014. In that evaluation, Lynn Stewart and her colleagues described a 25 intervention for medium to high risk assessed by Sarah, incarcerated batters, that focused on teaching pro-social communication skills and replacing violent attitudes toward women with pro-social attitudes. 150 treated men were followed upon release and compared to an untreated group of releases for the treatment group of IPV was significantly reduced, R equals 0.34. Aine Travers and her colleagues reviewed 8 studies of IPV interventions that could be categorized as to how closely the interventions followed the R&R principles. The overall effect size for treatment effectiveness was R equals 0.14 when the results were analyzed with respect to the level of adherence to risk, need, and responsivity. The results were as follows. No adherence, R equals negative 0.10, N equals 1. Partial adherence, R equals 0.12, N equals 4. Full adherence, R equals 0.34, N equals 3. Although the number of studies was low, the results were in the expected direction. Since Travers ETL 2021, another evaluation of an R&R-based intervention can be added with an effect size of R equals 0.39 based on the woman's report of controlling and aggressive behavior. Zarling and Russell, 2022. Others have now written that it is time to incorporate the R&R principles into program development. In conclusion, the male batterer treatment literature tells us little about the needs targeted in treatment and the value of assigning men to the appropriate intensity of treatment based on risk. Richards, ETL 2022. The assessment and treatment of the perpetrators of IPV can benefit from the general offender literature. The mentally disordered offender, MDO. When many people first hear the phrase mentally disordered offender, images of senseless, grotesque, and extremely violent behavior flood the mind. These people are publicized daily in the news and entertainment media. To the average citizen, the prevalence of mental illness among justice-involved persons appear high. Moreover, their behavior seems incomprehensible and almost always violent. Determining whether these views correspond to the facts is one of the purposes of this section. Estimating the incidence of mental disorder among criminal offenders requires a clear definition of the mentally disordered offender, MDO. One definition involves the presence of serious psychological symptoms. When symptoms are examined in relationship to crime, one study found that psychosis preceded only 4% of crimes committed by 143 MDOs. A widely accepted definition may still be off in the future. Part of the problem is that the two major social systems responsible for the MDO, the legal and the mental health systems, have differing interpretations of mental disorder. Furthermore, even within each system, there is disagreement on the meanings of such terms as insanity and mental illness. Estimating the prevalence of mental disorders. There have been a number of studies in the prevalence of mental disorders among criminal populations, both country-specific and globally. Three important findings emerge from the research. First, hardly anyone escapes a diagnosis of mental disorder. Fazal and Dench, 2002, summarized surveys conducted in 12 countries and found that among men, 10% had a major depression, approximately 5% had a major psychotic illness, and not unexpectedly, 65% had a personality disorder. The rates were slightly lower among women. In addition, these rates have not changed over time. Among youth, the prevalence rates are similar. A summary of 30 studies revealed an average rate of 21% for depression, 6% for psychosis, and 62% for a personality disorder. Second, the more serious mental illness, psychosis and major depression, are less frequent, 5 to 6%. These rates are higher in prison settings and among certain subgroups. For example, Emily Edwards and her colleagues found rates of 8.1% for psychosis, 25.6% for depression, and a PTSD rate of 23.9% for incarcerated veterans. The rate was 12.4% for non-veterans. Finally, the most frequent diagnosis was APD in the general population. The estimate of the prevalence of APD was 3.6%, much lower than what is found in justice-involved samples. However, it is the most seriously mentally ill person that alarms for public and we now turn to examining whether or not it is justified. This will be the end of Chapter 14, Part 1. Thank you.